do business with people they like. And so building those relationships and building a community feel where people feel, hey, I need some help.
Nothing beats getting in a room together and just throwing stuff up on a whiteboard and seeing what sticks and what slowly slides off as you investigate it further.
It's one thing to be able to say, hey, we know what the issues are. It's something entirely different to be able to say, and here's what the really smart CEOs are doing about it.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Mind Behind, and today we are joined by Russell Mills. Now, Russell is a forensic consultant and linguistics expert, mainly working within the insurance field. Now, I was fascinated when I heard Russell's talk at an event that we were both speakers at quite recently. He just had that slightly different take, and he works from accident reconstruction to analysing the nuances of written claims. He looks at how linguistic patterns can point to the presence of deception. Got me fascinated. Now, we often talk about having gut feelings. That's something that I talk about a lot. And he brings an academic front to that as well. Maybe to back it up, maybe to challenge some long-standing thoughts that we might have. Do the number of words actually matter? Do sudden shifts in pronouns matter? Do they reveal a lie? Russell's findings might surprise you. Also, we've got technology here. I know we seem to talk about this all the time, but if you look at some things like, I don't know, say ChatGPT, it's capable of writing an entire incident report. So we discuss how investigators can still identify a claimant's own words and why a human element of an interview remains the most critical part of any investigation. Look, this is a fascinating deep dive into the science of linguistics and the evolving landscape around insurance fraud and technology. So let's get right into it. Let's talk to Russell. Good to see you, Russell.
Hi, Graham. How are you?
You know what? This has been a long time coming.
It has.
We saw each other at the ACLA conference last year.
Oh, yeah, back in September, I think it was.
Yeah, it was. We both spoke. That great crowd. So, look, I was fascinated when I heard your talk. And I just kind of look. There's a few burning questions here. I want to really get into all the technical stuff. But the first one, Russell.
Yes.
Forensic consultant, linguistics expert, and researcher, former Allianz man. How do you explain what you do at a dinner party or a networking event? I'm really curious.
It is a bit of a chuckle to start off with when people ask me, because every single time I actually have to think about it on how I say what I do, because it is so diverse and so different and so unusual. But I tend to tell people that I break it down and I say I do forensic work. So by that, I mean that I just do things that are a little bit different to the normal run-of-the-mill type of things, but I have a passion for the unusual, in-depth investigative type of work. So be it from accident reconstruction, technical analysis of hail damage, or most recently studying linguistics. And then that usually sparks and prompts a question from them. You can see how I'm doing this. I'm kind of throwing it back to other people to analyze what they're saying, so I know what I need to say.
You don't be throwing it back to me. And you know what? It was funny. I've just we had Jack on, who's the voice director for the Bell Shakespeare Theatre.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, he's analysing me. He's checking my voice out. Now you're checking my words. I need to pick my guests a little bit more carefully. Look, you've essentially built a career around understand where people are. I was going to say we're working out where people are lying, but I suppose when they're telling the truth as well, and where they're being honest. Have you always had that instinct? Have you always had a kind of I've got this kind of inane trait that I can tell when people are not maybe being straightforward with me, or is this something you can train yourself to do?
Yeah, I think the trait part of it is more so an interest. So not being a trait, just having an interest and then building on that and training on that. Yeah, for sure.
So, what was your path to this? How did you get here?
Okay, so years and years and years ago, I hate to say how many actual years because it kind of gives away age, but many, many years ago, I did a course when I was an investigator. and I was working for an insurance company. And I hadn't even known about this line of investigative technique, and it was a course about linguistics. And it fascinated me for the fact that everything that we were taught over the week had a really sound grounding to it. And we were given examples that worked. We were told to go away and read 100 pages of an extract from a book as homework and pick the one word out of there that changed the whole context or inadvertently gave an admission. So we did things like studied the O.J. Simpson transcripts, a couple of other books that were crime books, things where titles of the books inadvertently gave away the fact that the people were guilty just by the way they named their books, that type of stuff. And that just fascinated me. And it fascinated me for the fact that people could write something or say something, and just if you knew where to look, you could actually tell what was going on. And it could be just one word. And I think that's what fascinates me about all of my work, and where there's that technical aspect of it. It's grounded in fact and research, and all you need to do is find out where it is. So I started just using this technique, and I took it for what it was. And you get some wins. You know, it was sold as a technique that provides an indicator. It's not a yes or no on deception or fraud. It's an indicator, and it just points you in the right direction to where to go next. So I used it every now and then, and a couple of other people that I did the course with used it now and then. I think I was probably the most interested in it out of the group that I was with. And I just was just there in the background for years. And it was just something that I spoke about occasionally with people and gave examples and watched TV and around, particularly around political elections. I don't like to talk politics, but you know, you walk past the TV and I say to my wife, without even stopping, he's lying, or why didn't he answer the question? And she'd be sitting on the lounge just going, yes, Russell, yes, Russell. So it was just that type of stuff. I just did it and didn't really think much about it. And then through an association that I was in, and I was a committee member, I met another committee member who was a professor in data analytics. And I got talking to him about this particular technique, and he did his PhD on fraud in accounting, or accounting fraud, whichever way you want to talk about it. And he said, look, I think you're onto something here to do a little bit more research. So we did some background scratching around and through academic articles, and we couldn't find any real grounded research on whether this was, in insurance investigations, whether this was a thing that had been researched. So we jumped at the opportunity and started my thesis.
There's a lot to unpack there. See, I'm listening to what you say now. Now we're going to get forensic. You know what you say. It's quite interesting because you know what I do, and we're working with teams and groups all the time. And when it comes to human behavior, I always say this is what tends to happen. There's no absolutes on it. Yes. So we can get an indication. We can look at personality styles, behavioral styles, and communication styles. We can do all these different things, but this is what tends to happen. Now, you've said that there are words that might change the whole context. Are we saying there's specific words that are almost a guarantee that something shifted, or is it almost the starting point for you to look at in more depth?
It's the starting point.
Okay,
absolutely. And even some of the things, and we can get into this a little bit later, but just as a bit of a teaser, some of the things that I had been using for years and years since I've done my research and put some statistical academic rigor around the theory. Doesn't particularly mean what I thought it meant.
We're not going to get into that later. You're not teasing me like that. Go on, just expand on that. That's cool.
Okay, so one of the real big things that we were taught originally was a change in pronouns, or the amount of, well, let's say the amount of pronouns that was in a passage of text. So if someone was using pronouns extensively and saying, I did this, I did this, I did this, and what have you. And then suddenly they stopped using pronouns. That was an indicator because they were taking a personal contact or personal connection away from their description. So when that pronoun usage changed or disappeared, that was the point where you would start to hone in your questioning as an investigator to identify why. My research now, I hesitate a little bit here because my research is at the point where it's in draft and it's just being read by my supervisors. So it hasn't been under examination, but I'm pretty confident with the results. So my first research question was, does word count indicate fraud?
Mm-hmm.
And I identified that the median word count for fraudulent versus non-fraudulent incident descriptions. So I think I really need to stop here and just say my research is on incident descriptions written for motor vehicle accident claims.
Okay.
Love to do it more broadly, but I haven't got that many years to do it. So when someone writes an incident description for an online claim, these samples that I had were people that didn't know that they were going to be in a study years down the track. So they were writing it as if they were just going ahead and writing an incident description. I always put the disclaimer here is this has all been passed by an ethics committee. I took all PII, personal identifiable information out of it. But I think it's really important that I did it this way because a lot of other research that had been done, not in insurance, but just lie detecting, if we can frame it that way, was done with other students writing deceptive stories. So it was under a controlled environment. Mine's not under a controlled environment. They're just people writing incident descriptions. So very long-winded way to say that the median fraudulent versus non-fraudulent word count was 31 to 32.
Okay.
So there's nothing in it. There's nothing in it. So, and these were my first two questions was that and pronoun usage, and it kind of set the stage for the next steps and the next level of my analysis. So the pronoun usage, it wasn't to start off with, do people use pronouns or don't use pronouns, but it was whether there was a change in pronouns. And once again, it was 50-50 for the pronoun usage on the number of pronouns for fraudulent versus non-fraudulent. So it's really hard to go into a PhD research paper and write one paragraph and say there's nothing there. Yeah. And your supervisor goes, come on, this is a PhD. You're going to have to go a bit further than that. So I then had to go, if there was pronouns, now what if there weren't pronouns? Is that an indicator? And then was there a change in pronouns? So a lot of analysis around that. And the short answer is no. There's no indicator on pronoun usages or lack of usages or scarcity.
I'm sorry for interrupting. How about AI? We are jumping. I know we're jumping kind of where I would normally go in this. I saw an example the other day that somebody submitted something to me. I'm not going to go any further than that. But the pronoun changed from I to you. In other words, they've gone, they'd used AI to come up with something, and AI obviously says you do this and you do that. Yeah. They changed it to I do this, I do that, and missed a few.
Yep.
Which was
good indicator.
Kind of good indicator. I'm just wondering what the use of AI does for the studies that you're looking at here then.
So it's really interesting for the fact that when I started my research, ChatGPT did not exist.
Oh my goodness, how old are you? That's such a long time ago.
So, one of my biggest questions is, so if AI writes an incident description, how do you pick that up? And the short answer is, I don't know. Unless you have changes of pronouns of I to you in different, first person, third person context type of thing. That's a real gimme. You don't need to do a PhD or do research to understand that, that's a giveaway. But if people are smart enough to use AI and give it enough instructions to say, write it in this context, then they also review it. They make sure that it's what they want to portray. And then they ended up submitting it. I honestly, other than using something like ChatGPT Zero or Grammarly to pick up whether it's AI created, which is here nor there because there are ways to get around that as well. I kind of step to the next point and say, at some point in the investigation or the claim, if it were to be investigated, the investigator is going to go out and talk to this person, and they're going to get their version in their own words. So instead of using my theoretical application at the beginning of an insurance claim, we can then use it halfway through it in an investigation, because then we're getting it in their words.
I've got to ask you now then, because this comes right back into my and our wheelhouse. There you go. I've swapped pronouns. Albert Morabian did a very kind of well used but mostly misunderstood study years and years and years ago about communication, saying that if it's incongruent to what we're saying, it's kind of made up with our tone of our language, the words that we say, and our physiology. And one of the things that he came up with was, if it's incongruent, if we're not fully bought into what we're saying, our physiology will probably be the giveaway. Our words will be the same, our tone might change, but our physiology will do something slightly different.
Yes.
And just get, and that's where you, well, not you because you know this stuff, but I would maybe get a gut instinct on somebody thinking they're not something right. Does that come into it, or is that too simplistic?
It can come into it, but let's kind of frame this right from the outset here. I'd love to sit down and do so much more than what I have.
Yeah.
But I'm not allowed to, because I need to keep it nice and concise and really kind of focused. So yes, it could come into it as part of this research. No.
We've all got biases. We've all got things that will trigger us to kind of go down one route or another, which takes me to kind of another thing I was thinking about just after our last kind of brief discussion. We've got people who have got different types of language patterns, English not their first language, different cultural, different. I don't know how to break this to you. I'm Scottish. So as much as we've got the same language, we'll have a different way of using it.
Yes.
And different. How do we take account of that?
That is a limitation of this study. And that's something that I've called out in my conclusion, is that English as a first language or second language is definitely a limitation, because I'm looking at the written word. I'm not listening to accents. So if you wrote something down and I wrote something down and gave it to a third person to read, they might pick up some differences, but they wouldn't pick up nationality differences as broad as what they are. So that absolutely, stick my hand up and say that's a limitation of the research. How to get around it? Haven't given much thought to that at this point, but I'm sure there's an avenue for that as well.
We did something I skipped over earlier. We mentioned words. Are we allowed to say what kind of words can change context? Again, we've spoken about pronouns, but are there specific words that you look for, you scan for, you search for in a text to go?
Yeah. Hedging. So people that use but. Tentative, which is classed as tentative language. That's a real giveaway. It's either them trying to justify, or it's them trying to deflect.
That's a huge word for us. We talk about that in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of one of the, oh yes, I hear what you say, but.
Mm-hmm.
And we know everything that's been said before is we're either trying to justify it or it begins to get diluted. Any others?
Yeah, causal justification. So if people are constantly trying to justify why they are doing things, and that's a really hard one, because as I say that, I listen to myself and what I say in this particular conversation, and it's got to be in context, because
yeah, of course it is.
I'm talking to you and providing you with justification of everything I'm doing, but I'm not trying to lodge an insurance claim and get away with a fraud. So in the context of it, causal justification, if there's more of that it's come out in my research that is a deception indicator.
How about emotional words? Like, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, or you shouldn't do that, it's not fair. Uh, how does that come?
Emotional words and particularly motion verbs, that is very high on deception as well. So if someone constantly saying
Oh, right, okay.
sad, say a sad context is a deception indicator too.
Can you give me an example of that? How do you mean?
If they are saying something that now this is really hard to kind of get, just a one-off example. So you really need the context, because people will say that they're sad that they've been involved in an accident. But if they put too much emphasis on it and they continually do it, then it may turn into a deception indicator.
Right. So they're kind of layering it on.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Okay. So it's all right to have a certain amount of emotion, but when we kind of go over the, okay.
Yep.
Most people think they're pretty good. Anybody I talk to about, they think they're pretty good at spotting somebody who's lying.
Yep.
But research shows we're bloody awful at it, in all fairness. We're not very good, are we?
No, we're not. And I kind of put that down to TV shows. I blame crime TV shows, because that's where everyone not in the industry learns and thinks, everyone that's not an investigator thinks they're an investigator because of crime TV shows.
Do you mean the dramas?
No. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
You mean the reality shows?
No, not the reality shows. The dramas. So things like NCIS and those type of crime shows.
It's an interesting point, because I do sometimes go down that YouTube rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah.
Things will come up, and you kind of watch like real life police investigations and everything. And when you don't know the final result, I'm sitting watching somebody being interviewed. Sometimes it's really obvious.
Yep.
But other times it's like it's not, and they're kind of talking through the nuance of what's just happened at that moment. And sometimes it is really slight. And for somebody who works with people, I think reasonably decent at that. But sometimes it's just to a layperson, there's not a chance that we'd really recognise it. If you did, it would be a guess.
And this is why I think a lot of the deception research has been done under a controlled environment, where students have been given the opportunity to write deceptive statements and given credits for it and things like that. The only research I can find where it's been done on a real life subject that has admitted lying was a murder case, and the sample size of the interview is 1, because he was interviewed and lied and then came clean later, and then they went back and they said, okay, can we find deception in what he originally said? So sample size of 1, to me, is not good enough, and it is something that, yes, they put it forward as an academic paper, not as a research PhD and things like that. But it was more so to say, here is at least a start to this type of research.
Russell, this is a question I've asked you before, so I genuinely don't know the answer. So could you be called as like an expert witness in something?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
For both sides?
Yes, absolutely. I don't distinguish between either sides. I think that adds credibility.
And kind of, well, it's really easy, and the first part is going down, and we've got that intrigue, we've got that NCIS and intrigue of like, I want to know when somebody's doing something bad and when it's not right, but there's also the point that there are people being challenged and they're telling the truth. They're absolutely being upfront. So you could be brought in as a linguistics expert on that side of things to turn around and say, in your opinion, the patterns that I'm seeing here are consistent with someone telling me this is what actually happened.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
We talked about emotional words. I don't know you're going to answer. You're probably not going to answer this. If you were to give me one piece of advice to make me more difficult, not that I do it, not that, and if I did, then I've been obviously very good because I've not been caught. But what's something that would make me harder to detect, or is that something you can't tell me?
I would probably rather not say something, but I won't say these are the words you use and these are the words you don't use.
Yeah.
But I will tell you and it's not a linguistics thing. It's more of an interview technique. And if anyone else is listening to this that as an investigator, you totally understand. An investigator's best tool is silence.
It's science.
Silence.
Silence.
Because people will get uncomfortable and fill the gap. And that's when you start listening to the words.
It's good fun, isn't it?
Yep.
I mean, any negotiation, any decent negotiation program will tell you, say it and just leave it.
Yep.
Let's see who breaks it. Interesting. I was just wondering, because the pressure sets in, the guard maybe comes down that little bit, we begin to get a little bit sloppy again with the language.
Yep.
And again, I suppose we need to take in some people just get more nervous. So
Yes.
there's a lot to think about here.
There is.
Just the last couple of questions. So I'm just absolutely fascinated by this. What's one thing that genuinely kind of still surprises you about maybe some of the stuff that you're reading or researching, or some of the stuff that you've seen? What's kind of stuff that still goes, wow?
There's not a lot of research on insurance investigations with linguistics. That in itself surprised me. That what I'm doing is kind of, I'm not going to say it's the first, but there isn't a lot, and there's not a lot that's been done in depth. There's I think what surprises me about this whole industry and what I've read and what I've looked at is there's been a lot of research on how directors and CEOs are deceptive in what language they use in board reports.
Oh, okay.
And to me, that is wow. Like people it shouldn't surprise me. I've done a lot of courses on occupational fraud and things like that, like staff fraud, but how that has been honed in on quite extensively, and I've used a lot of that research as the grounding for my literary review on this is the closest to what we've got on how people will be deceptive about certain information. That absolutely surprised me.
So let me just jump back to something you mentioned earlier. Politicians.
Yes.
You see, I paused there for dramatic politicians. You said that you kind of listened and you heard somebody being interviewed. I'm curious, two things. One, what was it you heard? You know, is there a general phrase, or a general way of being with it? Is there something that happens specifically? And we'll keep it at politicians. We'll keep it as broad as that,
right,
rather than individuals. And secondly, are you sitting analysing every TV show?
Yeah, look, I'll answer the second question first. Yes, because I can't help it. And it's not something that I'm particularly happy about, because I don't feel as though sometimes I can sit down and just enjoy something. I'm constantly on. The first question, hedging, always. Not answering the question, and providing other answers. But I don't know whether, because it's so widespread in politics, I don't know whether it is more so the media training that they get.
I think there's a large part to that. There's a large part when you're looking at taking questions under pressure, is to buy yourself time, just to get, and that's not to give a fraudulent answer. That's just to buy yourself time to give a good, honest answer, and maybe take the emotion out of it. And I think sometimes it comes across as they're being deceptive, and people are being just kind of avoiding questions when they're not. They're actually trying to understand the full part of it.
Yep.
I was watching a piece on ABC the other day. It was a podcast about watching it, and it was highlighted by the presenter. One of his pet peeves was reporters or journalists who ask 4 or 5 questions at once, and then the politician doesn't answer them, and they maybe seem deceptive. But they're choosing the easiest one to answer. You know, tell me about what your economic policy is, and there's homelessness that's going on here, and obviously what's happening in Gaza. What are you going to do about this? And they'll pick, because they've got limited time to do it. how much of this comes down to a good questioning rather than answer?
Oh, so much, but I think you're right where that questioning is multiple questions is a tactic more so than a bad a knowledge of how to question. I think it's very deliberately done for those reasons that you've just stated. It annoys me as a viewer when I see multiple questions, because it's kind of like, well, come on, it's your job. Yeah.
We know they're not going to be answered.
That's right.
Or we're going to get some surface level answer.
And I read a lot of transcripts now. Take politicians out. Let's just talk back to investigations, insurance investigations, because I do a lot of expert work, and I read a lot of interviews for certain insurance claims, and I cringe when I see or read two questions in one, and I think, well, until I get to the next line of the answer, and then I get to the next line of questioning where it's been done deliberately. But first glance, it's like, oh, don't ask those two questions together.
What advice can you give to someone who is maybe trying to work out, is the communication that they've been given, is it straightforward? Is it honest? Is there a hidden message behind it? Can you give any ideas and tips?
Yeah, don't
try to second guess it.
Don't try. Because a lot of the things we've spoken about today have very complicated statistical analysis behind them, and you don't need to know what analysis. You just need to really, it's one of those things where if you just went to the conclusion of my thesis, then you would probably get what you wanted. You don't need to know how I got there. The examiners that look through my paper will tell me whether I've done it right or wrong. And it's incredible. There's some academic papers on this. And I tell claims advisors this when I do presentations to them. There is actually merit to gut feel. And it's been proven.
You're taking my last question. I kind of mentioned this earlier. We were talking about kind of the some of the studies, the very basic studies. We've got a gut feel that something's not right. We might not be able to tell somebody's lying or telling the truth, but we just know that something's not aligning. There's something not quite right. What's a project you'd love to work on in any industry, to do anything and use your skills? What's a project that would be this would be the pinnacle for Russell using his linguistics knowledge?
I'd like to get this type of research that I've done into mainstream fraud prediction models.
Okay.
So have it sitting in the background, and look, I've helped build fraud prediction models for insurance companies, but it's been on structured data, not unstructured data like text. I'd like to be able to make this type of research so easy to add to fraud prediction models that it isn't an option anymore. It's just part of the course.
Any particular markets or industries or sectors or
anything? And I've thought about this, and it would work obviously for insurance fraud because that's kind of where it's aimed at the moment. But it would also work for things like government departments where, tax departments, Centrelink, those type of departments, anywhere where you have got a conversation with someone that is impromptu, not particularly rehearsed and crafted, but and that kind of takes out a lot of things,
I can
particularly
imagine.
with press 1 to go here, press 2 to go there, and that type of thing. You're losing so much in conversation, but you got to have those buy-offs between productivity and efficiency as well, because like the number of people that are fraudulent are very low numbers too. So I'm not saying everyone's fraudulent by all means and by any means. So it is a tricky kind of balancing act. But people see that the the little numbers can accumulate to big dollar values. So I think just getting into any type of industry where it can be used in a fraud prediction context. I have spoken to people that do analysis of documents as well, and looked at how it could be applied to the handwritten or the typed part of documents, to see whether they have been fabricated, and those types of things.
Final question. Promise. Final question. Where does technology take us with this? Where do you see that coming in?
Technology on the side of the identification, I think that is we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg with AI.
Okay.
But I do kind of warn the fact that it's not going to do everything that we can do now. You still need that balance between a human interaction and AI. I've seen so many times where AI has been used, and similar to your example of the different pronouns, where unless you know what you are talking about and you use AI to actually assist you to do that little bit better and maybe improve 5 to 10% on what you're doing, whether that be context or whether it be productivity, then I think that's the right way to use it. If AI is used particularly just to create everything, there are going to be examples of it hallucinating and just throwing out stupid comments, questions, answers, those types of things. So we're not at that point yet. Technology on the other side, where we spoke about what you create, is that going to be driven by technology? Sure. But then we just have to be creative ourselves to think about how we can use, I'll use the incident descriptions and insurance as an example again, how we can use other indicators and then kind of reverse engineer it and go and talk to people and get their answers and see whether it matches what was written.
You can imagine we're talking about technology and AI daily.
Yep.
At the moment. And I interviewed Ted Miller quite recently. He was talking about AI in law, just about where it's going. We've had several conversations with him, and it's really interesting how the human element's always there, and we can use AI and technology to maybe pick up some of the heavy grunt work, but the final analysis needs to come down to human and needs to be assessed.
Yeah. Can I just add I was on a panel the other week, and AI came up in relation to fraud prediction, and a lot of people in the audience, it was kind of a light bulb moment when there was myself and another researcher on the panel, and my supervisor was actually chairing it. And the light bulb moment for people in the audience to understand that AI is used not just to pick up fraud, but to reduce false positives so it's a better customer experience.
Can you explain that? What do we mean by false positives?
So if someone gets identified as an indicator for a fraudulent claim, for argument's sake, we might be able to use AI to go, no, those indicators are there, but it's not enough to meet a threshold to say we need to go and interview them. And the less number of genuine people that are interviewed, with the potential of it being a fraud to start off with the indicators, the better. So, you want investigators going out and talking to people that are fraudulent or have a very, very strong indicator of deception. It doesn't mean that they are, but they may inadvertently have fallen into a couple of deception indicators in a fraud prediction model. But we want to reduce that, and we want to use AI to be able to give a better customer experience.
Interesting. And that's the one thing AI is good at, is kind of looking at patterns
Yep.
and beginning to give us that information that we can then make that decision.
Yep.
Russell Mills, you're an absolute star. It's been too long to put this together, but I'm glad we've done it. Looking forward to kind of when paper is published.
Yep.
We'll maybe even talk a little bit more in some detail.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All the time. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, mate.
Bye-bye.
Bye.